The greatest threat to any ancient empire was not an army, but silence. For a ruler sitting in a palace, trying to command territories spanning thousands of miles, the slow creep of news could mean the difference between glory and ruin. The single most critical bottleneck to power was the speed of information. This is the story of the ingenious, high-stakes solution that conquered distance itself, the military relay rider system. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the hidden technology that truly built and sustained history's grandest empires, from the steppes of Asia to the roads of Rome. We will uncover how a simple idea of fresh horses and dedicated riders became the nervous system of continents, deciding the fates of entire civilizations. How did a message cross a mountain empire faster than a modern hiker? What happened when this vital system suddenly failed? What forgotten ambition does our own world of instant data still share with a lone rider on the Mongol steppe? Think of it not as one person on a very long journey, but as a baton in a race that never ends. The military relay system was a feat of logistical engineering, a machine built from human and animal parts designed for one purpose: maximum velocity. Its genius was in its refusal to rely on a single heroic messenger. Instead, it broke the impossible distance. At the heart of this was a simple, powerful principle: the fresh horse and the fresh rider. A single courier, no matter how determined, faces inevitable limits: fatigue, the need for rest, the gradual wearing down of his mount. The relay system eliminated those limits entirely. A rider would gallop at full speed from his home station to the next outpost, perhaps 20 or 30 miles away. There, he would hand his sealed message, often a verbal report or a written dispatch, to a colleague who was already rested, fed, and waiting with a saddled, fresh horse. That new rider would then burst forth and repeat the process, sprinting to the next link in the chain. The message itself became the constant traveler, while the men and horses functioned as replaceable, renewable components. This created a continuous wave of motion that could flow across a continent without ever slowing down. To make this wave possible, 3 critical components had to be perfected, and each was as important as the other. First, the physical infrastructure, the chain of posting stations. These were not simple inns. They were fortified waypoints strategically placed at intervals a horse could manage at a hard gallop. The Persians called them stathmoi, the Mongols perfected the yam, and the Romans later institutionalized the Cursus Publicus. Each station was a self-contained hub, stocked with food, water, spare tack, and most importantly, its own stable of specialized horses. These were not the heavy war horses of knights, but animals bred for endurance and speed, likely similar to modern Arabian or Akhul teak breeds, capable of repeated, intense bursts of effort. Second, you needed the dedicated corps of riders. These men were more than just messengers. They were a professional, often government-employed class. They knew their specific segment of the route intimately, every hill, every river crossing, every potential ambush site. Their entire lives were organized around readiness, waiting for the signal, the shout, or the sight of dust on the horizon that meant the baton was coming. Finally, the system required a relentless focus on logistics. Each station had to be supplied, the horses cared for, the riders paid and housed. This operational blueprint, this anatomy of speed, transformed a kingdom from a collection of distant lands into a connected, responsive organism. The message was its lifeblood, and these stations with their fresh horses and alert riders were the beating heart that kept it circulating. This operational blueprint found its most breathtaking expression not on paved Roman roads, but on the open, wind-swept steppe. The Mongol Empire, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna, presented a communication nightmare of unimaginable scale. Its solution was the Yam, a relay network so vast and efficient it turned the empire's greatest weakness, its sheer size, into its ultimate strength. Established under Genghis Khan and perfected by his successors, the Yam was the central nervous system of the largest contiguous land empire in history. Its stations, called Yam, were placed roughly every 20 to 40 miles along major routes, a distance a horse could cover at a full gallop before tiring. But the true scale is almost beyond comprehension. Historians estimate that at its peak, the entire Yam system maintained between 10,000 and 50,000 horses in a constant state of readiness. This was not a casual postal service, it was a permanent, empire-wide state of alert. To manage this colossal machine, the Mongols developed a sophisticated system of administration and control. A rider or official traveling on imperial business carried a passport called a paiza, often a metal or wooden tablet inscribed with the Great Khan's authority. This paiza was your license to demand a fresh horse, food, and shelter at any Yam station. But with this privilege came ruthless accountability. Every movement was logged. A rider receiving a message was given a strict time limit to reach the next station, and station masters were held personally responsible for any delays. The penalty for failing a relay could be severe, ensuring every link in the chain remained taut and reliable. This created a flow of information that was, for its time, nearly instantaneous. A message could travel from the Mongol capital at Karakoram to the frontiers of Eastern Europe, a distance of over 5,000 miles, in just under 2 weeks. To put that in perspective, a single traveler making the same journey at a normal pace would have taken many months. The Yam's purpose was brilliantly dual in nature. Its primary engine was military intelligence, reports of rebellions, sightings of enemy movements, and tactical updates from the front lines raced along these routes, allowing the Mongol High Command to coordinate armies separated by thousands of miles with a precision that stunned their adversaries. But the system was equally vital for imperial governance. Tax records, census data, decrees from the Khan, and diplomatic correspondence all flowed on the same current. This meant the will of a single ruler in Mongolia could be felt and enforced from the forests of Russia to the mountains of Persia within a matter of days. The Yam did not just carry messages, it carried the palpable, immediate presence of imperial power itself, binding a continent of diverse peoples under a single, responsive command. It was the steady pulse that proved the empire was alive, awake, and watching. While the Mongol Yam harnessed the raw expanse of the steppe, another empire approached the same problem from the opposite direction, through sheer, meticulous engineering. For Rome, speed was not just about horses, it was about the road. The Roman Cursus Publicus, or the public course, was a relay system built not for conquest alone, but for permanence. Formalized by Emperor Augustus around the turn of the first millennium, it was the ultimate expression of a state investing in its own longevity, transforming their legendary network of stone-paved highways into the arteries of imperial control. Where the Yam was adapted to the landscape, the Cursus Publicus created a landscape for communication. Every meticulously laid mile of the Via Appia or the Via Augusta became a dedicated data lane. The system's genius was in its specialization. It operated on 2 distinct tiers: for urgent military intelligence, tax reports, or imperial decrees. There was the Cursus Velox, the fast course. This was the priority channel. A messenger on the Velox would command the fastest horses and lightweight carriages, changing mounts at relay stations called mutations every 6 to 12 miles, pushing the limits of animal endurance for pure speed. But Rome understood that an empire runs on more than just words, it runs on stuff. For the heavy lifting, the system deployed the Cursus Clabularius, the wagon course. This slower, robust network used ox-drawn carts to move the essential bulk, military-paid chests, grain supplies for frontier legions, building materials, and the personal baggage of officials. This dual-stream approach meant a dispatch about a rebellion in Britannia could race south on the Velox, while the reinforcements, their weapons, and their rations would follow predictably on the Clabularius. The logistical coordination this required was staggering. Each mancio, a larger rest house spaced about every 25 miles, functioned as a regional hub. It housed station masters, veterinarians, cartwrights, and grooms, all dedicated to maintaining this endless flow. To use the system, a traveler required a diploma, an official warrant that specified their route, their rank, and the level of service they could demand. This prevented abuse and kept the military and administrative traffic flowing smoothly. The primary heartbeat of the Cursus Publicus was, without question, military. News of barbarian movements on the Rhine or a legion's success in Judea traveled to the emperor with a reliability no adversary could match. It allowed Rome to practice a form of real-time governance over vast distances, projecting power not just through the threat of the legion, but through the certainty of the courier. An edict issued in Rome could be read in the forums of distant provinces while the sentiment behind it was still fresh. This institutional endurance, this promise that the empire's will would always find a way through, was perhaps its most powerful psychological weapon. The roads were not just for marching, they were for listening and for speaking, binding the periphery to the center with an unbreakable thread of information and authority. But long before the Mongols mastered the steppe or the Romans paved their highways, a different empire pioneered the very concept of a dedicated information highway. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, under rulers like Darius the Great, faced a similar challenge of scale, governing a realm that stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. Their answer was the legendary Royal Road, a marvel of ancient logistics that served as the foundational blueprint for every relay system that followed. This was not merely a path, but a state-sanctioned corridor of power, meticulously planned and maintained. Its most famous route ran from the administrative capital of Susa, deep in modern-day Iran, all the way to Sardis on the coast of Asia Minor, a staggering distance of around 1,600 miles. To service this vital artery, the Persians established a chain of 111 posting stations at regular intervals. These were secure waypoints offering shelter, fresh horses, and supplies, not for the public but for the empire's official messengers. The Greek historian Herodotus, our primary source, immortalized their efficiency with a famous claim. He wrote that these royal couriers, riding in a relay fashion, could cover the entire immense journey from Susa to Sardis in just 7 days. For context, a normal caravan traveling the same route would have taken 3 months. Now, historians note this likely wasn't a pure relay of fresh riders on every segment. The couriers themselves, trusted agents of the king, probably covered longer multi-stage sections, but the critical innovation was already in place, the infrastructure itself. The Royal Road established the indispensable model, secure, stocked stations positioned at calculated intervals to enable a continuous, protected flow of imperial communication. It proved that speed was not an accident but an architecture. By investing in this fixed network of waypoints, the Persian state guaranteed that its commands could outpace rumor, rebellion, and decay. This was the prototype, the first great proof that to hold a vast territory together, you did not just need soldiers on the borders. You needed a system that could carry your voice faster than the wind, turning a sprawling collection of provinces into a single, responsive entity. The Persians built the template, and every empire that came after, from Rome to the Mongols, would look upon that template and see the future. Yet for all the speed of a galloping horse, some empires conquered distances where hooves could not tread. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire faced a geographical challenge that rendered the Mongol and Roman models impossible. Their realm was a vertical world, a tapestry of soaring mountain peaks, deep ravines, and narrow cliffside paths, terrain utterly hostile to cavalry. Here, the relay system had to be reinvented from the ground up, or rather, from the runner up. The Inca's solution was the chasqui, the fleet-footed messenger who became the living pulse of the mountain empire. The chasquis were not simple couriers, they were elite athletes, selected from youth and trained for a life of endurance. They operated in a relay system perfectly adapted to the brutal Andean landscape. Along the empire's vast network of roads, which could span over 25,000 miles, the Incas built way stations called tambos. These were strategically placed about every 3 to 6 miles, a distance a runner could cover at a full sprint in the thin mountain air before exhaustion set in. The system was a masterpiece of anticipation. A chasqui would wait at his tambo, constantly alert. The moment he spotted his approaching colleague on the horizon, he would begin jogging in place, ready to receive the message, and burst into a sprint without breaking stride. The handoff was seamless, a continuous flow of human energy across impossible terrain. But what exactly was being handed off? The Incas had no widespread written language, so their messages took two primary forms. The first was memorized oral report. A chasqui would be trained to carry complex verbal messages, news of crop yields, troop movements, or administrative orders, with perfect accuracy over his short segment. The second and more famous was the quipu, a device of knotted cords. This was not writing as we know it, but a sophisticated mnemonic and recording system. The colors of the cords, the types of knots, and their positions could encode numerical data like census counts or tribute records, and possibly even narrative information. A chasqui would carry the quipu, and likely a verbal explanation of its meaning, passing both to the next runner. This allowed complex information to travel from Quito in the north to Cusco, the imperial capital, in as little as 5 days, a journey that would take a regular traveler weeks. This was a communication network divorced entirely from animal technology. It relied solely on human stamina, meticulous organization, and an intimate knowledge of the land. The chasqui system demonstrates that the core principle of the relay, the breaking of distance into manageable sprints with fresh operators, is universal. Whether the medium was a horse on the steppe, a carriage on a Roman road, or a runner on a mountain path, the goal was identical: to collapse time and space, to make the empire feel smaller, smarter, and more connected than it had any right to be. The tambo was the Inca's stable, and the chasqui was his own tireless horse, proving that the will to connect could find a way, even at the top of the world. The true power of these networks did not lie in the roads or the horses, but in the people who animated them. Every empire understood that its relay system was only as reliable as the individual at each link in the chain. The selection and training of these messengers was therefore a matter of state security, creating a specialized class of human whose entire existence was dedicated to becoming an extension of the imperial will. They were chosen not just for strength, but for a precise blend of physical endurance, mental fortitude, and unshakable loyalty. Consider the life of a Mongol Yamchai. Recruited from local communities along the Yam routes, his primary qualification was an almost supernatural familiarity with his segment of the steppe. He needed to navigate featureless grasslands in blizzards or pitch darkness, knowing every subtle dip, every water source, every potential shelter from a sudden storm. His training was life itself on the open plain, honing an ability to judge a horse's stamina and push it to the limit without breaking it. For the Yamchai, loyalty was enforced through a system of brutal accountability, but it was also cultivated through status. He was a direct servant of the Great Khan, a vital thread in the fabric that held the world together. In stark contrast, a Roman Cursus operating on the paved highways of the Cursus Publicus was a product of imperial bureaucracy. While also requiring immense stamina, his world was one of order and documentation. He needed to understand the complex system of warrants and diplomas, to log his arrivals and departures meticulously at each mancio. Literacy was a valuable asset, as he might carry written dispatches. His training involved mastering the rhythm of the relay itself, the precise handoff, the care of different horse breeds used for speed versus burden, and the protocols for interacting with officials of varying rank. His reliability was measured in punctuality and accuracy, the clockwork precision of the Roman state made flesh and motion. Then there was the Inca chasqui, facing perhaps the most physically demanding role of all. Selected as boys for their exceptional lung capacity and athletic build, they were raised for the mountains. Their training was a relentless regimen of high-altitude running, learning to control their breath in thin air while carrying messages and small supplies. They memorized vast amounts of information verbatim, becoming living archives. Their topographic knowledge was intimate, knowing which mountain pass was clear in which season, which rope bridge was secure. For the Chasqui, loyalty was woven into the cultural and religious fabric of Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. His service was a sacred duty to the Sapa Inca and the sun god Intai. He ran not just on paths but on a spiritual landscape. Across continents, these individuals shared a common burden and privilege. They were the trusted few, the ones who could be relied upon when a rebellion sparked or a king died. Their minds were maps, their bodies were instruments of policy, and their unwavering commitment turned a theoretical network of stations into a living, breathing circuit of power. The empire's reach was literally defined by how far and how fast its messengers could go. But a rider is only as swift as the animal beneath him. The true engine of any land-based relay system was not the man but the horse. This was not a matter of simply grabbing any available mount. Empires invested staggering resources into creating and maintaining specialized equine corps, living machines bred for a single, brutal purpose: to sprint, recover, and sprint again, day after day across a continent. The horse was the most critical and most expensive piece of technology in the entire apparatus. Different empires facing different terrains engineered different solutions. On the open steppe, the Mongols perfected a machine of endurance, the legendary steppe pony. These were not the towering war horses of European knights. They were compact, sturdy, and incredibly tough, standing only about 13 hands high. But what they lacked in stature, they made up for in phenomenal resilience. Bred over centuries to survive the harsh Mongolian winters, they could forage through snow for grass, required far less water than other breeds, and possessed an almost supernatural stamina. A Mongol rider might switch horses multiple times in a single day's travel, but each steppe pony was capable of a sustained, ground-covering gallop that could outlast any pursuit. This was a biological adaptation to the environment, harnessed and multiplied by the Yam system. In stark contrast, the Persian Empire prized a very different kind of horsepower. For the couriers of the Royal Road, and especially for the nobility and generals they sometimes transported, prestige and power were communicated through size and majesty. This led to the famed Nicaean horse, bred in the lush pastures of the Nicaean plain in Media. These were the supercars of the ancient world, towering animals often described as golden chestnuts or gleaming whites, renowned for their strength, speed, and imposing presence. A Nicaean horse could carry a heavily armored rider over long distances, making it ideal for both the relay and the parade ground. Its breeding was a state-controlled enterprise, a symbol of imperial wealth and technological superiority. Yet breeding the perfect horse was only the first and perhaps simplest challenge. The real logistical nightmare began once these animals were stationed across thousands of miles of remote outposts. Each relay station, whether a Mongol Yam or a Roman Mutatio, had to function as a self-sustaining equine support center, maintaining a string of fresh, healthy, and ready-to-run horses required an endless supply chain. Fodder was the primary concern. A single active station might house 24 horses, each consuming roughly 20 pounds of grain and hay per day. In fertile regions, this meant dedicating local farmland to support the imperial post. In arid zones like the steppe or desert routes, it meant organizing caravans to ship in hay and barley, a costly and vulnerable undertaking. Then came water. A relay station was always built near a reliable source, a river, a spring, or a deep well, because a dehydrated horse is a useless horse. Veterinary care was constant. Grooms and farriers were permanently stationed to treat lameness, saddle sores, and the illnesses that spread quickly in close quarters. The hooves of these animals, pounded relentlessly on hard roads or rocky trails, required expert and frequent attention. The financial overhead was colossal. Historians estimate the Mongol Yam System may have consumed up to half of the empire's entire administrative budget. This was not a side project, it was the central nervous system, and it was funded accordingly. Every sack of grain, every groom's wage, every horseshoe nail represented a direct investment in the empire's ability to know, and therefore to control. These animals lived in a state of perpetual readiness, their heads lifting at the sound of an approaching rider, their muscles coiled not for a journey's end, but for the next explosive beginning. They were the living, breathing fuel of imperial speed. Yet the most ingenious security measure was often the message itself. For the Inca chasqui, without a written script, the primary method was the memorized verbal report. This was not casual gossip, it was a highly disciplined practice. A chasqui would train to receive a complex message about harvest yields or troop numbers and repeat it back verbatim until it was etched into his memory. The message became a living part of him for the duration of his sprint, impossible to intercept physically because it existed only in his mind and breath. To add a layer of secrecy, some empires employed cryptic language or codes. A messenger might be given a seemingly innocent phrase that held a hidden meaning known only to the sender and recipient, a practice that is the ancient ancestor of modern cryptography. The goal was always the same, to ensure that if a rider was waylaid, the information he carried would die with him or remain utterly useless to an enemy. This sacred duty came with the gravest of consequences. The penalty for losing a dispatch, allowing it to be captured, or failing to deliver it with all possible speed was severe across every empire. For a Mongol Yamchai, such a failure was not just a professional mistake, it was a betrayal of the Great Khan's direct authority and could result in harsh punishment. Roman military law prescribed severe penalties for couriers who compromised their mission. This established an unbreakable rule: the message was more important than the messenger. His life was secondary to the intelligence he carried. This principle forged a bond of absolute trust between the state and its riders. They were not merely employees, they were sworn guardians of the empire's secrets, the human vessels for its most urgent thoughts. Their unwavering commitment transformed a simple scroll or a knotted cord into an object of immense power, moving through the landscape with a protected, singular purpose. It was this combination of physical speed and absolute security that made the relay system the ultimate instrument of control, ensuring that when an empire spoke, its words arrived intact, authentic, and decisive. The numbers alone tell a story of a transformed world. To grasp the revolutionary impact of these relay networks, we must move beyond maps and see the landscape through the lens of time. Consider a critical piece of military intelligence: the news that a rival army is mobilizing 200 miles from the imperial capital. Under normal conditions, this information would travel at the speed of a walking army or a merchant caravan. An army on the move, with its supply wagons, infantry, and siege equipment, was a slow beast, managing perhaps 10 to 15 miles on a good day. That crucial report would take over 2 weeks to arrive, by which point the enemy could be halfway to your gates, their plans solidified and their momentum unstoppable. Now activate the relay. A Mongol Yam rider, switching horses every 20 miles and maintaining a relentless gallop, could cover that same 200 miles in a single, breathtaking day. The Roman Cursus velox courier, pushing fresh horses on paved roads, could achieve it in under 3 days. This is not a marginal improvement, it is a fundamental reordering of reality. The empire now possessed a time machine. It gained a strategic window of 10 days, perhaps 2 full weeks, that its adversaries simply did not have. In that window, everything became possible. Reinforcements could be summoned from another frontier. Diplomatic envoys could be dispatched to negotiate or sow discord. Defensive fortifications could be strengthened. The entire calculus of war shifted from reaction to orchestration. The ruler was no longer receiving news of events that had already solidified. He was receiving bulletins on a situation still in flux, allowing him to shape the outcome. This velocity created a permanent state of psychological advantage. An enemy commander knew, or would learn through bitter experience, that any move he made would be known in the distant capital almost as soon as his own scouts reported it back to him. The empire could see farther and think faster, making it appear omnipresent, its reach foreshortened by the pounding hooves of its messengers. This speed was the ultimate force multiplier, turning information into the sharpest weapon in the imperial arsenal. This velocity of information turned distant thrones into active command centers. The strategic impact was immediate and profound, transforming how empires fought wars. For the first time in history, a ruler could orchestrate a campaign across a continent, as if he were standing on a hill overlooking a single battlefield. The Mongol conquests provide the ultimate case study. Their infamous multi-pronged invasions, where armies would attack from seemingly impossible directions hundreds of miles apart, were not acts of chaotic aggression. They were meticulously synchronized ballets of force, choreographed by messengers racing along the Yam. A general in Eastern Europe and another in the Middle East could receive adjusted orders from Karakorum within days, coordinating their advances to stretch enemy defenses, create feints, and converge on a target with terrifying precision. The enemy would not be fighting one army, but a single, distributed intelligence that moved its pieces across a chessboard the size of a continent. This was command and control on a geographic scale previously unimaginable. Similarly, on the fortified frontiers of the Roman Empire, the Cursus Publicus provided a decisive defensive advantage. Imagine a Roman governor in Gaul. A scout's report of Germanic tribes massing near the Rhine would be rushed by relay to the nearest legionary fortress. From there, a priority dispatch would speed south to Rome itself. But crucially, the system also allowed for lateral communication between provincial commanders. The governor could simultaneously alert his colleagues in neighboring provinces, allowing legions to reposition along the frontier to shore up weak points long before the main barbarian force could decide where to strike. This turned a static line of forts into a dynamic, responsive shield. The empire could concentrate its strength at the exact point of danger because it learned of the danger while there was still time to act. This capability fundamentally changed the nature of imperial power. An empire was no longer just a collection of provinces held together by roads and occasional troop movements. It became a unified, reactive organism. The central command was not just a symbolic head, but the functioning brain of a vast body, receiving sensory input from the extremities and sending back coordinated motor commands with a speed that matched the threat. Decisions made in a palace courtyard in Rome or a felt tent in Mongolia directly shaped the outcome of a skirmish on a distant riverbank 1,000 miles away. This near real-time awareness, relative to the era's standards, granted empires a supernatural quality of omniscience to their subjects and a demoralizing inevitability to their foes. The message rider, therefore, was not merely a courier, he was the central nervous system's impulse carrying the will that moved armies and decided the fate of nations. This relentless velocity came at a price, one paid not in gold from the imperial treasury, but in sweat from the lands the roads crossed. For all their strategic brilliance, these relay networks were voracious beasts of consumption, and their endless appetite was fed by the local populations they were built to control. The gleaming efficiency of a Roman mancio or a Mongol Yam station masked a deep, often grinding social reality. The system functioned as a powerful engine of extraction. While the central authority provided oversight and coordination, the day-to-day burden of supply fell squarely on nearby communities. This was a hidden tax levied not in coin but in goods and labor. Villages were required to furnish a constant stream of provisions, fodder for the horses, grain for the riders, firewood for the forges, and fresh meat for the pot. A passing imperial courier, flashing his official warrant, had the right to demand food, a fresh mount, and a place to sleep, all at the local community's expense. This duty, known in many societies as corvée labor, meant farmers could be pulled from their fields to maintain roads or repair station buildings, while skilled craftsmen like blacksmiths and carpenters were conscripted to keep the system operational. The station itself was not a guest house, it was a mandatory service point, and hospitality was not a choice but a command. Over time, this constant demand could bleed a region dry. In the later years of the Roman Empire, historians note that the burden of supporting the Cursus Publicus grew increasingly oppressive. Provincial governors and wealthy landowners, who were responsible for ensuring their districts met these quotas, often passed the strain down to the peasantry, demanding ever more from communities already facing their own hardships. A system designed to unify the empire could paradoxically become a primary source of local resentment. The very roads that carried the emperor's reassuring words could also carry the bitter complaints of those who felt exploited by his endless need for speed. The relay network thus embodied a fundamental tension of imperial rule. It was a military marvel that projected power over incredible distances, yet it was also a fragile web of dependency. Its sustainability relied on a delicate balance, the willingness of distant communities to shoulder the cost of an empire's conversation. When that balance tipped, when the demand for horses and grain began to feel like a crushing weight rather than a shared duty, the threads of loyalty could fray. The stations remained, the horses stood ready, but the social contract that fueled the entire machine was at risk of breaking down. Yet for all their engineering and discipline, these networks of speed were astonishingly fragile. A relay system stretched over thousands of miles was a chain with countless links, and each link was exposed to the unpredictable realities of the ancient world. The greatest threat was not a rival empire, but nature itself. A sudden blizzard could close a high mountain pass in the Andes, trapping a line of chasquis in their tambos, their messages growing cold and stale. On the open steppe, a spring thaw could turn vital river crossings into impassable torrents of mud and water, isolating entire sections of the Mongol Yam for days. A drought could wither the grasslands, forcing stations to scatter their horse herds in search of pasture, and breaking the constant readiness that was the system's core principle. Weather did not recognize imperial decrees, and it could silence the fastest courier with a wall of snow or a flooded plain. Human threats were equally relentless. Isolated relay stations, often stocked with valuable horses, food, and sometimes even imperial coin, were tempting targets. Bandits and raiders, operating in the lawless spaces between imperial control, could ambush a lone rider or overrun a lightly guarded post. The loss of a few horses was a setback, but the murder of a station's staff or the theft of its mounts could sever a link entirely, creating a dead zone in the information flow. Political instability posed a more insidious danger. During a civil war or a succession crisis, rival factions might seize control of key stations to monopolize communication or deliberately sabotage routes to blind their opponents. A local governor contemplating rebellion would first move to control the roads and the posting houses, understanding that whoever controlled the message system controlled the narrative and the strategic initiative. Perhaps the most silent and devastating vulnerability was illness. Horse herds kept in close quarters were petri dishes for disease. A virulent strain of equine influenza or a hoof ailment could sweep through a network of stations, leaving behind rows of sick and dying animals. Without healthy horses, the relay simply stopped. There were no spare parts to order, no quick replacements from a central depot. Rebuilding a breeding stock took years, and in the meantime, the empire's nervous system went numb. A single broken link from any of these causes did not just slow the mail, it created an intelligence blackout. A frontier general awaiting orders or a capital awaiting news of a battle would be met with an echoing, terrifying silence. For weeks, the empire would be flying blind, making decisions based on information that was suddenly old and possibly very wrong. In that window of silence, a minor border raid could escalate into a full-scale invasion. A manageable rebellion could solidify its hold on a province, and the delicate illusion of omniscient control would shatter. The very system designed to eliminate uncertainty could, in its failure, become the greatest source of it. This constant tension between magnificent reach and profound vulnerability was the true drama of imperial power. A high-wire act played out across continents, where the penalty for a misstep was not just a delayed letter, but the unraveling of order itself. Two distinct philosophies of power emerge from the dust of these ancient roads. The Mongol Yam and the Roman Cursus Publicus represent the ultimate contrast in how to solve the same problem, one born from the boundless steppe, the other from the disciplined city. Their differences reveal not just a choice in logistics, but a fundamental divergence in imperial character. The Yam was a system of fluid motion. It was lightweight, adaptable, and designed for limitless expansion. Its stations were often simple outposts, easily established and, if necessary, easily moved. This reflected its nomadic origins, a civilization that carried its entire world on horseback. The Yam did not seek to permanently alter the landscape, but to flow over it like water, following the paths of conquest. Its philosophy was one of pragmatic meritocracy and relentless forward momentum. Authority was carried in the paiza tablet, a direct personal grant from the Khan to his servant. The system rewarded speed and reliability above all else, a perfect mirror of the Mongol military machine that valued skill and results over hereditary rank. It was an empire built on the gallop. The Roman Cursus Publicus, in stark contrast, was an empire built on the foundation. It was heavy, permanent, and infrastructurally intensive. Its genius was not in mobility, but in engineered order. This system was a monument in motion, an expression of Roman law and civic engineering made manifest. Its paved roads, its stone-built mansions, its complex bureaucracy of warrants and logs, all screamed of a civilization that intended to stay forever. The Cursus was not merely a communication network, it was a statement. It declared that Rome was here, that its order was carved into the very earth, and that its systems would outlast any individual emperor. Its philosophy was one of institutional permanence. Authority came not from a personal token, but from a properly issued diploma, a document generated by the vast, impersonal machinery of the state. Where the Yam was an extension of the Khan's will, the Cursus was an extension of Rome itself. This contrast shaped everything. The Yam could expand almost organically with the empire's borders, a network that grew like a living vine. The Cursus required years of planning, immense labor, and staggering investment before the first official cart could roll. One was a tool for creating an empire, the other was a tool for maintaining one. The Yam thrived on the open, adaptable space, the Cursus on the defined, controlled line. They each perfectly reflected the soul of the civilization that built them, one a force of dynamic conquest, the other an architect of enduring legacy. One asked how far and how fast a message could go, the other asked how permanently and predictably it could travel. Both answers, in their own way, reshaped the world. But the hoofbeats of the imperial courier carried far more than just military secrets. While born from the urgent need to command armies, these relay networks quickly evolved into something far greater, the indispensable civilian and economic lifeline that nourished the entire empire. They became the only reliable infrastructure for any long-distance, time-sensitive exchange, transforming a system of control into a circuit of prosperity and culture. Officials traveling to govern distant provinces did not march with legions. They rode the Cursus Publicus or the Yam, their journeys scheduled and secured by the state's own postal service. This allowed for consistent, hands-on governance, as a newly appointed governor could reach his post in weeks rather than months, bringing with him the latest policies and expectations from the capital. Perhaps the most vital civilian function was the movement of imperial wealth. Tax revenues, collected as coin or as valuable goods like grain, oil, or cloth, were too tempting a target to send slowly with ordinary caravans. Instead, they moved under the protection of the relay system's secure stations and dedicated guards. The Roman Cursus Clabularius, with its sturdy wagons, was essentially the empire's armored cash transport, ensuring the gold that paid the legions and fed Rome arrived predictably and safely. This reliable flow of capital was the bloodstream of the state, and the relay network was its heart. But the system's impact reached beyond raw administration into the vibrant pulse of commerce. While not a public postal service, the secure routes maintained by the empire became the preferred highways for high-value trade. A merchant carrying a fortune in Chinese silk or Arabian spices would gladly pay a toll or seek protection near an imperial station, knowing the road was patrolled and the bridges were maintained. The famous Silk Road itself was not a single road, but a network of paths, and its most traveled, safest stretches were often those paralleling the Yam stations of the Mongols or the Persian Royal Road. The relay system did not create the silk trade, but it made it viable on a continental scale by providing islands of security and predictability in a vast and dangerous landscape. Most profoundly, these channels of communication became conduits for something even more powerful than silk or silver: ideas. Religious movements spread along these imperial pathways. Buddhism traveled from India into Central Asia and China via the trade routes safeguarded by the Kushan and later Mongol empires. Christian texts and missionaries moved across the Roman world on the very same roads used by imperial couriers. News, artistic styles, technological innovations, even fashion trends, all hitched a ride on the relentless motion of the state's messaging system. A new style of pottery from a provincial capital, a report of a novel farming technique, or the lyrics to a popular song could diffuse across thousands of miles with surprising speed, carried in the memories of officials, merchants, and travelers who relied on the relay network's infrastructure. This cultural diffusion was an unintended yet world-shaping consequence. The system built to project military power became the central nervous system for an entire civilization, carrying the nutrients of commerce, the hormones of administration, and the electrical impulses of culture. It bound the empire together not just with commands, but with shared economic rhythms and slowly blending traditions. The soldier, the tax collector, the silk merchant, and the wandering monk all walked the same road, relied on the same stations, and were all, in their own way, dependent on the same simple, brilliant idea that to hold a world together you had to keep it moving. A sealed message was only the most obvious cargo a rider carried. His true value to the empire lay in his eyes, his ears, and his very presence on that lonely stretch of road. These men were far more than simple couriers. They were the mobile sensory organs of a distant throne, the living threads that stitched the abstract map of empire to the gritty reality of its provinces. With every journey, a rider performed a dual mission: to deliver the official dispatch and to absorb the unofficial state of the realm. He became an imperial agent in motion, his observations as critical as the scroll in his pouch. A rider traversing his regular route grew to know its normal rhythms intimately. He would notice if a village usually bustling at harvest time was strangely quiet, a potential sign of crop failure or unrest. He would see if a vital bridge on the Imperial highway was damaged, or if a mountain pass was blocked earlier than usual by snow. He would note the condition of the fields, the mood in the market towns, and the posture of local garrisons. Upon reaching a relay station, his verbal report to the station master would include these mundane details, which were then compiled and forwarded up the chain. This transformed the entire communication network into a vast, decentralized intelligence-gathering apparatus. The central government received not just curated reports from its governors, who might have reasons to shade the truth, but raw, observational data from hundreds of trusted sources who had no stake in local politics. The rider was the empire's fact-checker on the ground. His role often extended into low-level enforcement of imperial will. A rider carrying the authority of the Khan's paiza or the emperor's diploma was a walking symbol of central power, especially in remote areas rarely visited by high officials. He could demand provisions and service not as a request but as a right, reinforcing the hierarchy of the state with every meal and fresh horse. In some systems, riders were explicitly tasked with monitoring local officials, ensuring that tax collectors were not pocketing imperial revenue or that garrison commanders were maintaining discipline. They could carry preliminary judicial orders or summons, acting as the first step in bringing provincial matters to the capital's attention. This made them figures of both respect and apprehension. For a local farmer, the sight of the relay rider was a reminder that the capital was watching. For a corrupt official, that same rider was a potential conduit for exposure. The system ingeniously created a force of observers whose primary job was mobility, making them difficult to corrupt or influence locally. A rider from the next station over had no deep ties to the community he was passing through. His loyalty remained firmly with the system that employed him. This constant rolling audit by thousands of anonymous men turned the empire's roads into channels of accountability. The message was the command, but the messenger was the assurance, the living proof that the command could be verified and would be heard. He collapsed the distance between the palace and the pasture not just with speed, but with perception, ensuring the ruler's map was never just a drawing, but a living, breathing landscape understood in real time. This enduring dominance of the relay rider presents a profound historical puzzle. For over 2,000 years, from the dusty couriers of Persia to the final dispatch riders of the Napoleonic Wars, the fastest way to send a message across land remained fundamentally unchanged. It was a technology of flesh, sinew, and hoof, a system whose core principles saw no revolutionary successor until the electric pulse of the telegraph wire in the 19th century. This was not for a lack of trying or imagination. Societies experimented with other methods, but each fell short of the relay's brutal efficiency. Naval signaling, using flags or flashing lights, was brilliant but limited to line of sight across water or between hilltops. Beacon chains, like the famous fires that warned of the Spanish Armada, could transmit a single, pre-arranged signal, danger, with incredible speed over a specific route. But they could not carry the complexity of a battlefield report, a tax ledger, or a diplomatic negotiation. They were a one-note alarm, not a conversation. The relay supremacy lay in its beautiful, simple versatility. It was a general-purpose technology. The same horse, the same rider, the same station could carry an endless variety of information, from a single word to a heavy scroll, adapting to the terrain from desert to mountain pass. It leveraged the most powerful and adaptable biological engine readily available, the horse, and combined it with the most sophisticated data processing system of the ancient world, the human mind. No mechanical invention could match this combination of endurance, intelligence, and terrain independence for so long. The limitations were the limits of biology itself, the speed of a galloping horse and the stamina of a human rider. For millennia, no innovation appeared that could move a complex thought across a continent faster than that. The world waited for a fundamental paradigm shift, not an improvement to the horse, but an escape from it altogether. That shift arrived not with a faster horse, but with a silent, instantaneous spark traveling along a metal wire, finally breaking a technological stasis that had held since the days of Darius the Great. The relay rider's legacy did not vanish with the fall of Rome or the fracturing of the Mongol Empire. It found a powerful new expression in the Ottoman Empire, a state that stood at the crossroads of continents and history. The Ottoman Ulak system was a masterful synthesis, an heir to multiple traditions, blending the engineering of Rome, the endurance of the steppe, and the administrative rigor of Persia into a single, formidable network. As the Ottomans expanded from a small Anatolian principality into a world power, they inherited the physical and intellectual infrastructure of the empires they absorbed. From the Byzantines, they took over the ancient Roman road network and its fortified way stations. From the Persian and Arab administrative traditions, they adopted sophisticated methods of record-keeping and bureaucratic control. And from the Mongol model, they understood the necessity of speed across vast, open spaces. The Ulak system fused these elements into a coherent whole, maintaining a web of communication that stretched from the Balkans to the gates of Vienna, across Anatolia, and deep into the Middle East. This was not a simple copy, but an evolution tailored for the unique challenges of a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire. At its core, the system operated on the same timeless principle: fresh horses and dedicated riders stationed at calculated intervals. But the Ottomans added layers of meticulous organization. Ulak stations, known as menzilhanes, were placed along major routes, each required to keep a specific number of horses, known as ulak atlari, ready at all times. The riders, the ulaksis, were often drawn from local communities and held responsible for the security and speed of their segment. What set the Ottoman system apart was its deep integration into the state's military and administrative machinery. Every major military campaign, from the conquest of Constantinople to the sieges in Hungary, was directed through this network. A command from the Sultan in Istanbul could reach a frontier governor or army commander with a speed that kept Ottoman forces agile and responsive. This allowed for the coordination of complex multi-front operations, much like the Mongols before them, but with the added stability of a permanent, road-based infrastructure. Furthermore, the Ulak was the lifeline of imperial governance. In an empire encompassing Greeks, Slavs, Arabs, and Turks, maintaining control required a constant flow of information. Tax records, judicial decrees, and intelligence reports from provincial governors all traveled via the Ulaksi. This steady stream of data allowed the central authority in the Topkapi Palace to manage diversity not through neglect, but through informed, if distant, oversight. The system's ability to deliver firmans, the Sultan's decrees, to the farthest provinces within days was a continuous demonstration of sovereignty. It meant that a legal decision made in the capital could be enacted in a village near Damascus or Belgrade, reinforcing the idea of a unified imperial order. The Ulak system thus demonstrates the relay model's enduring relevance, adapting seamlessly into the early modern period. It proved that even as warfare evolved with gunpowder and cannons, the fundamental advantage still belonged to the power that could move information faster than its rivals. The Ottoman state, often seen through the lens of its majestic architecture or formidable janissaries, was equally dependent on the humble, galloping Ulaksi, the living thread that stitched its diverse territories into a coherent, responsive whole. Even the most resilient systems contain the seeds of their own decline. For the imperial relay networks, the end did not come with a single dramatic collapse, but through a slow, corrosive decay from within, a process perfectly illustrated by the fading pulse of the Roman Cursus Publicus. The very factors that made the system a marvel of control became, over centuries, sources of profound weakness. The immense cost of maintaining thousands of horses, staffing hundreds of stations, and supplying endless fodder placed a crushing burden on the imperial treasury and the provincial economies forced to support it. As the empire faced mounting external pressures, funding this luxury of speed became harder to justify. More insidious than simple expense was the creep of corruption. The privilege of using the Cursus Publicus meant for official business was increasingly abused. Powerful senators, wealthy landowners, and even the church began demanding warrants for personal travel, overloading the network with non-essential traffic. Station masters, under pressure and with little oversight, might sell the best horses to local elites or divert supplies for private profit. The system, designed for military urgency, grew bloated and slow, its priorities muddled by graft and privilege. A message that once flew with the wind now crawled, delayed by bureaucratic inertia and the weight of a decaying state. The infrastructure remained, the roads still stretched to the horizon, but the vital, uncompromising spirit of the relay had been hollowed out from the inside. This internal decay made the entire empire more vulnerable, its reactions sluggish, its awareness dimmed. When the external shocks finally came, the system was too weakened to adapt. External conquest delivered the decisive blow to unified networks. A relay system is a manifestation of a single, centralized authority, its routes tracing the lines of imperial control. When that authority shattered, the network shattered with it. The fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into rival khanates is a classic example. The magnificent Yam, which once connected the Pacific to the Mediterranean, was abruptly severed at new political borders. A station that once served the great Khan of a unified empire now lay in a hostile territory, its horses no longer available to riders from a neighboring khanate. The continuous wave of information broke into isolated pools. What remained were local, truncated versions of the once global system, useful for regional administration, but incapable of the continental coordination that had been the Yam's true power. This pattern repeated across history, where the fall of a central power turned integrated communication highways into disconnected footpaths. The network's survival was entirely dependent on the political unity it was built to sustain, and when that unity dissolved, its purpose evaporated. For centuries after the great empires faded, smaller, slower messenger services persisted. But the age of the continent-spanning imperial relay was over, a victim of political entropy. The final, absolute end for the strategic relay rider arrived not with a conqueror's sword, but with a silent spark along a wire. The 19th century delivered two successive technological shocks that rendered the 2,000-year-old paradigm instantly obsolete. First, the steam railway conquered distance with a mechanical relentlessness no horse could ever match. It moved not just messages, but entire armies and their supplies at speeds that redefined strategic possibility. Yet the train, for all its power, was still bound to iron tracks and fixed schedules. The true revolution was immaterial. The electric telegraph severed the last tether between information and physical travel. For the first time in human history, a complex thought could cross a continent faster than a bird could fly, unburdened by weather, terrain, or fatigue. A battlefield report from a distant frontier, which once took days of desperate riding, now arrived in a capital city in minutes, encoded as a series of clicks. The military advantage was so profound, so absolute, that it changed the nature of command overnight. The relay rider, the trusted agent of emperors for millennia, was suddenly an anachronism for any urgent strategic purpose. His gallop was now a quaint and slow curiosity compared to the instantaneous pulse of electricity. The nervous system of empire, once built from pathways, stations, and living creatures, had been replaced by a network of copper and code. The age of the hoofbeat was over, and the age of the signal had begun. The pounding hooves and urgent shouts of these riders have long since faded into silence. So how can we possibly reconstruct the intricate workings of a system that vanished centuries ago? The answer lies in a fascinating detective story, one pieced together from physical ruins, fragile manuscripts, and the eyewitness accounts of travelers who stood in awe of what they saw. Our knowledge of these networks is not a single, clear blueprint, but a mosaic assembled from scattered fragments of evidence. The most tangible clues come from the earth itself. Across the landscapes of former empires, archaeologists have identified the faint outlines of posting stations. Along the Silk Road in Central Asia, you can find the stone foundations of what were once Mongol Yam stations, often positioned near a vital water source. In the deserts of Jordan or the hills of Turkey, the ruins of a Roman mancio stand beside an ancient highway, its stables and storage rooms still discernible. These sites are not just piles of rock, they are frozen moments in time. The size of a stable can tell us how many horses were kept. The presence of large grain storage pits reveals the scale of provisions needed. The strategic placement of these ruins, consistently spaced a day's hard ride apart, confirms the operational logic we read about in texts. This physical evidence provides the skeleton of the system. To understand its beating heart, we turn to the written word. We are extraordinarily fortunate to have surviving administrative documents. From the Mongol Empire, a priceless text known as the Yam Regulations has been preserved in later copies. This is not a romantic chronicle, it is a bureaucratic manual. It details the exact number of horses each station must maintain, the rations allowed for officials, and the severe penalties for failing a relay. It reads like a military field guide, offering a direct window into the meticulous, demanding world of the Yamchai. From the Roman world, we have letters from provincial governors complaining about the cost of maintaining the Cursus Publicus, and stone inscriptions that commemorate the building or repair of a road section, often naming the official in charge. These are the internal memos of empire, revealing the daily struggles and proud achievements of keeping the network alive. Finally, we have the invaluable perspective of outsiders, travelers who encountered these systems and recorded their astonishment. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, famously described the speed of the Persian Royal Road couriers, coining the phrase that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Centuries later, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo traveled the Mongol Yam and described it in vivid detail, noting the comfortable beds and good provisions at each station, and the incredible efficiency with which even fruit and messages for the Great Khan were sped across the empire. These accounts give us the human scale, the wonder and the routine that official documents often omit, yet for all these sources, enormous gaps remain. We have no first-hand diary of a Roman cursor or an Inca chasqui. The exact training regimens, the personal stories of the riders, the countless mundane messages that flowed back and forth are lost to time. Historians must therefore become forensic reconstructors, comparing archaeological data with textual hints and using logical deduction to fill in the blanks. They ask practical questions. How much grain would 20 horses consume in a month? How many miles could a loaded ox cart realistically cover in a day on a mountain path? By engaging in this meticulous, interdisciplinary puzzle work, scholars breathe life back into the silent stations and empty roads, allowing us to hear, if only faintly, the distant echo of the gallop that once ruled the world. The true measure of a communication system is not found in its blueprints, but in the chaos of a battlefield. To see the Mongol Yam in its full, terrifying glory, we must witness it in motion during the empire's westward surge into Europe in the 1240s. This campaign was not a blind stampede. It was a surgical operation directed by an intelligence network that moved with a speed Europe had never before encountered. The Mongol commanders Subutai and Batu Khan faced a complex strategic puzzle. Eastern Europe was not a unified target, but a patchwork of rival kingdoms, most notably the divided forces of Poland and Hungary. The Mongols did not simply march toward the strongest army. They used their Yam-enabled scouts to understand the entire board before making a move. Small, fast-moving units of Mongol scouts, the eyes of the army, fanned out across hundreds of miles. Their mission was to map every river crossing, assess the strength of every castle, and most critically, to locate and track the gathering Christian armies. These scouts were the first link in the intelligence chain. The moment they identified a significant force, perhaps the Polish army mustering near Legnica or the Hungarian host assembling at Mohi, that information became a priority dispatch. A scout would race to the nearest Yam station, transfer his verbal report to a fresh rider, and set in motion a wave of data flowing eastward across the steppe. This was not a single message on a single journey. It was a continuous stream of updates, enemy numbers, their composition, their morale, and their exact positions, all flowing back to the high command in near real time. Because the Yam stations were established along their advance, this intelligence loop remained taut and responsive, collapsing the strategic distance between the scattered Mongol columns. Subutai, operating in Hungary, and the other commanders moving through Poland were not acting independently. They were connected by this relentless flow of information, allowing for a coordination that appeared supernatural to their enemies. The divided nature of the European response played directly into Mongol hands, and the Yam system allowed them to exploit this division with perfect timing. The battles of Legnica and Mohi, fought days apart in April 1241, were not separate events. They were two acts in a single, orchestrated campaign. As the Polish army under Duke Henry the Pious moved to confront one Mongol force, the Yam carried news of his position and strength to the overall command. This allowed Subutai to authorize the engagement at Legnica with confidence, knowing the Polish force was isolated. The swift Mongol victory there was then communicated back along the network. Meanwhile, crucial intelligence about the Hungarian King Bela IV's army, camped at the Sojo River near Mohi, had been flowing in for days. The Mongols knew the terrain, the size of the Hungarian camp, and the placement of its guards. With the Polish threat neutralized, the full, terrifying focus of the Mongol maneuver could shift to Hungary. The famous night attack and flanking maneuver at the Battle of Mohi was not a desperate gamble. It was a plan executed with precise information. The Yam system had given Subutai a god's eye view. He knew where Bela's forces were strong and where they were vulnerable. He knew the layout of the river and the surrounding hills. This intelligence allowed him to coordinate a complex, multi-pronged assault that involved building a temporary bridge upstream and attacking from an unexpected direction at dawn. The Hungarian army, though large, was caught in a tactical trap sprung by a commander who saw the entire battlefield from miles away. The devastating victories were a direct product of informational supremacy. European chroniclers of the time, witnessing the bewildering speed and coordination of the Mongol armies, could only attribute it to sheer numbers or dark magic. They had no framework to understand a military that moved at the speed of its own communication. The Mongols did not outfight Europe through brute strength alone. They outthought it through superior situational awareness. The Yam rider, galloping through the night between stations, carried the very diagrams of victory. He delivered not just words, but the power to see through hills and across kingdoms, turning separate armies into fingers of a single, clenched fist that struck with synchronized, annihilating force. The Mongol victories showcased the ultimate power of a functioning relay, but its absence could unravel an empire just as decisively. Decades of internal strain had left the Roman Cursus Publicus a shadow of its former self, a vulnerability that would be catastrophically exposed during the brutal 50 years known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. This was not a single event, but a perfect storm of disasters that overwhelmed the empire's ability to respond. Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine and Danube frontiers. A powerful Persian dynasty revived in the east and captured a Roman emperor, and a devastating plague swept through cities and military camps. Yet the gravest threat emerged from within as rival generals, proclaimed by their own legions, plunged the empire into a relentless series of civil wars. In this maelstrom, the communication network faced pressures it was never designed to withstand. The Cursus Publicus depended on political unity and economic stability to function, and now both were shattered. Hyperinflation, driven by emperors debasing the silver coinage to pay their armies, rendered the old budgets meaningless. The carefully calculated funds for fodder, for paying station staff, for maintaining wagons evaporated. A station master in Gaul might be ordered to support the passage of a legion, but the imperial warrant he held was now paid for in coins of such low metal content they were nearly worthless. How do you buy grain for 20 horses with money that no merchant will accept? The system began to starve from a lack of real resources. Simultaneously, the network became a battleground itself. A usurper marching on Rome would seize control of the key roads and posting stations along his route, not to use them for imperial communication, but to deny them to his rival. A station caught between two contending emperors might be ordered to provide horses to both sides, draining its reserves until nothing was left. The secure, predictable routes fractured into isolated segments of control. The result was a strategic paralysis that accelerated the empire's fragmentation. An emperor in Rome, facing a Frankish invasion in one province and a Persian army in another, could no longer rely on timely, accurate intelligence from either front. The steady stream of dispatches slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely for weeks at a time. By the time a confirmed report of a frontier breach arrived in the capital, the invading force might have already ravaged the countryside for months and fortified its gains. Even when orders could be issued, there was no guarantee they would reach their destination, or that the distant commander had the means to carry them out. The empire lost its greatest advantage, the ability to concentrate its strength at the point of greatest danger. A legion on the Danube could not be shifted to reinforce Italy if the command to do so was intercepted or simply never arrived. Provincial governors, cut off from the center and left to their own devices, began to act with increasing autonomy, some even breaking away to form short-lived independent states like the Gallic Empire in the west. The failure of the Cursus Publicus was both a symptom and a cause of the collapse. It mirrored the disintegration of central authority, and by breaking the threads of command, it made reunification infinitely harder. An emperor like Aurelian, who finally began piecing the empire back together in the 270s, had to literally reconquer the severed provinces one by one, a task that required first re-establishing the very communication lines that made large-scale military campaigns possible. The silent roads did not cause the crisis, but their silence guaranteed the empire would face it blind, deaf, and utterly alone, proving that a network built to transmit power could also transmit its dissolution. The true terror of the system was not the message it carried, but the clockwork certainty of its arrival. For those living within the empire's grasp, this relentless rhythm created a profound psychological reality, an unshakable feeling that the central power was not just distant but omnipresent. The predictable, rapid pulse of couriers transformed imperial authority from an abstract idea into a daily, observable fact. A governor in a far-flung province, receiving detailed instructions from the capital within days of sending a request, would feel a chilling sense of proximity. The emperor was not a remote figure on a coin. He was an active participant in local affairs, his will arriving with a speed that defied geography. This cultivated a powerful sense of imperial inevitability. To obey was to align with a force that moved faster than thought itself, a force that seemed to transcend the normal limits of time and space. For loyal officials and garrison commanders, this was a tremendous morale booster. It meant they were never truly alone or abandoned. Support, whether in the form of strategic orders, reinforcements, or simply the reassurance of being heard, was always just a few days away. Their loyalty was reinforced by tangible proof that the system worked, that their service was seen and would be answered. This created a feedback loop of confidence, binding the periphery to the center with threads of reinforced trust. For those contemplating defiance, however, the same system was a master tool of psychological warfare. A rebel leader or a disgruntled local chieftain operated in a world of rumors and delayed information. His plan relied on the old, slow rhythms of power, on the precious weeks it would take for news of his actions to reach the capital and for a response to lumber back. The relay network shattered that assumption. It meant that any move against the empire would be known almost immediately. The very act of rebellion would trigger a countermove before the rebel could fully consolidate his gains. This created a paralyzing deterrent. The emperor was no longer sleeping, he was perpetually awake, his gaze carried by every rider on the road. The system manufactured an illusion of omnipotence, making the state feel like a living, reactive entity that could not be surprised or outmaneuvered. A potential dissident would look at the Imperial Road winding past his town, see the fresh horses waiting at the station, and understand that his secret would not keep. The distance that once provided safety had been collapsed. This psychological edge was often more powerful than legions. It prevented rebellions from even starting by convincing ambitious men that the game was already rigged, that the center held all the cards because it received them first. The steady gallop of the courier was a continuous, audible heartbeat of the state, a sound that reminded everyone, friend and foe alike, that the empire was alive, attentive, and terrifyingly fast. The hoofbeats of those ancient messengers still echo in the words we use every day. Our modern term post, as in postal service, travels directly back to the Latin cursus publicus. It derives from positus, meaning placed or stationed, a perfect description of those relay riders and horses permanently positioned along the imperial roads, waiting for the call. The legacy is even more vivid on the map. Across the vast expanse of Central Asia, from Turkey to Mongolia, you can still find towns and regions bearing names that incorporate yam or jam, silent markers of where a Mongol relay station once stood, its purpose now fossilized in geography. These linguistic footprints are ghosts in our dictionary, reminding us that the architecture of ancient communication is literally written into how we describe our own world. This archetype of the lone, determined messenger racing against time and the elements has never left our collective imagination. Long after the strategic need vanished, the romance of the relay took root in our stories. The American legend of the Pony Express, though it operated for less than 2 years, captured the spirit perfectly. A single rider switching horses at remote stations, carrying news across a continent, embodying grit and sacrifice. Our epic tales are filled with their spiritual descendants, from the marathon runner of ancient Greece bringing news of victory to the fictional ravens and riders of fantasy sagas, tasked with carrying a vital warning to a distant kingdom. The specific technology changes, but the core narrative remains, a solitary figure, endurance tested to its limits, bearing a message upon which everything depends. This enduring storytelling template reveals a profound human truth. We are captivated not just by the message, but by the vulnerability of its journey. The relay rider represents a fragile thread of hope and order in a chaotic world, a single point of failure upon which entire destinies pivot. His journey is a concentrated drama of will versus obstacle, making the abstract idea of communication feel heroically personal. We instinctively understand that in that desperate gallop, history is being written not by armies, but by the individual who outruns time itself. The principles that guided a Mongol rider are still woven into the fabric of our digital age. The 19th century Pony Express serves as a direct, nostalgic echo of the Imperial relay. For a brief 18 months, this private venture used a chain of stations and fresh horses to carry mail from Missouri to California, proving that even in an era of steamships and telegraphs, the old logic of the sprinting relay could still conquer a continental wilderness. Yet it was a last gasp. The Pony Express was swiftly rendered obsolete by the transcontinental telegraph wire, a reminder that when a new paradigm emerges, it sweeps the old one away completely. But if we look closer at our own world, we find the ancient relay rider's spirit alive and well, operating at a speed and scale he could never have dreamed of. Every email you send, every video you stream, travels not as a single, continuous stream, but as a cascade of digital fragments called data packets. These packets do not take a direct, uninterrupted path from your device to its destination. Instead, they leap from node to node across the vast network of the internet, much like a message jumping from one relay station to the next. Each router they encounter functions as a high-tech way station, reading the packet's address and instantly deciding the fastest available path to send it onward. If one route is congested or fails, the packet is dynamically rerouted, ensuring the message gets through even if part of the network goes down. This is the digital descendant of the Mongol Yam's redundancy and the Roman road's alternative paths. The core problem remains brilliantly unchanged. How do you move information reliably across a vast and unpredictable distance? The solutions have simply transformed from biological to mechanical to electronic. The horse was replaced by the locomotive by the copper wire, and the wire by the fiber optic cable and the wireless signal. Yet the fundamental architecture of breaking a journey into managed hops, of having prepared nodes ready to receive and forward a payload, of prioritizing certain traffic for speed, is a direct conceptual inheritance. We no longer worry about a horse going lame, but we engineer backup servers and redundant network paths. We no longer fear bandits on a mountain pass, but we encrypt our data packets against digital interception. The goal is identical: to collapse space and time, to make the distant feel immediate. Whether the cargo is a sealed scroll or a stream of ones and zeros, the human need to connect, to command, and to understand drives us to build systems that conquer the silence between points on a map. This relentless drive to connect reveals a deeper truth about power itself. If we strip away the marble monuments and the epic battles, we find a simpler, more fundamental technology at the core of every great pre-modern empire. It was not the sword, the siege engine, or even the written law that truly enabled dominion over continents, but the organized relay system. This was the defining operational innovation, the critical non-military technology that turned ambition into administration and conquest into a lasting state. Military force could seize territory, but only a system of relentless communication could hold it. The relay network was the physical internet of its age, a scaffold of speed upon which everything else was built. Its primary function was always governance. A victorious army plants a flag and marches on, but an empire must collect taxes, adjudicate disputes, appoint officials, and disseminate a common set of rules. None of this is possible if a command issued in the capital takes a season to reach a distant province, and the response another season to return. The relay system collapsed that administrative lag into a matter of days or weeks, creating a feedback loop of control. It allowed a central authority to not only give orders but to receive reports, to audit its own agents, and to adjust policies based on what was actually happening on the ground. This transformed a collection of occupied lands into an integrated political organism. The Roman Empire without the Cursus Publicus would have been a fragile shell, its provinces drifting into autonomy the moment a legion departed. The Mongol Empire without the Yam would have fractured under its own staggering size, its khans ruling in ignorance over lands they could not comprehend. The system's presence or absence became the single greatest predictor of an empire's reach and its resilience. An empire could survive military defeats, poor harvests, and even weak rulers, but it could not survive a prolonged failure of its communication network. That failure meant blindness, and blindness in a world of constant threat was a prelude to fragmentation. The relay rider, therefore, was more than a courier. He was the essential civil servant, the human conduit through which the abstract idea of a unified state was made daily practical reality. His gallop was the sound of empire working, the rhythmic proof that a distant capital was not just a place on a map, but an active, attentive mind capable of governing a world. From the Persian Royal Road to the final rider before the telegraph, one constant held for over 2,000 years. The ultimate speed limit for information was set by biology, by the pounding heart of a horse and the determined will of the person urging it forward. What empires achieved was not a faster horse, but a perfect system around that horse, a breathtaking feat of logistics and political imagination. These networks were the invisible yet vital arteries of the ancient and medieval world. They carried the lifeblood of empires, which was never gold or soldiers alone, but something far more potent, timely information. The station master waiting with a fresh mount, the rider memorizing his verbal report, the engineer plotting a road's straight course, all were engaged in the same grand project, collapsing the tyranny of distance. They turned a continent of silent, separate valleys into a single, whispering room. Their legacy is a testament to the human drive to connect, to understand, and to exert will across the vastness of time and space. That drive simply found new vessels, from the horse to the wire to the wireless signal. It makes you wonder what other forgotten, everyday technologies quietly built the world of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for joining this journey down history's lost highways.